Hello, and thanks for tuning into the Scuttlebutt podcast. I'm your host, Brock Briggs, and today I'm speaking with Barrett Bogue. A common thread you'll see in Barrett's story hinges around communication as we unpack a few topics he's come to be an expert on: transition, the GI Bill, and starting a business. Barrett deployed back in 2004 in the middle of his schooling, and upon his return, came to understand why communication is so important, not just with our peers and family, but with organizations. He was dealing with his schools, employer, and family looking to help him, but unsure how. This understanding of the problem gave him the passion to fulfill a position he later held at the VA, and then later on, when he started his own company, Evocati, a PR and consulting firm helping companies communicate and grow their relationships with the military connected community. During the segment on education and the VA, Barrett gives a detailed history of the GI Bill, which really helps to quantify the impact the GI Bill has had on our country over the last 75 years. While individual service members see a check to pay for their schooling every month, it's important to understand the larger impact that has had on our communities and education levels throughout the country. The thread on communication is one we pull on a lot. When it comes to people, Barrett talks about something he calls radical empathy and how that plays a role in our transition process. On the organization side, Evocati is working to solve a problem I had never even thought about before. Barrett recounts a story of his firm having the pleasure of announcing that Fayetteville State was going to offer free tuition to any military connected family. Yes, free. That's crazy enough of an announcement to get headlines, but it's not quite as simple as just calling the local news. We walked through some of the programs he used that helped him hone his idea for a business, including Bunker Labs and the Stanford Ignite program. I've included links to all those resources and a few more that we talk about throughout the show in the show notes. But first, you've got to hear it from the man himself. Please enjoy this conversation with Barrett Bogue. Barrett, thank you so much for being here with me today. I've this conversation has been a couple weeks in the works, and I've been looking forward to it as I kind of learn and read more about you and hear about your story. I think from our conversation, the most interesting place to start would be you coming back from your deployment in 2004. You served in the Marine Corps from 99 to '07 in the reserve with that one deployment. And you speak about that deployment as a pretty transformational time for you. Let's start there, and then we can kind of work through everything else that we got.
Sure, Brock. First off, I want to say thanks to you for this opportunity to talk about a military transition, leadership, and entrepreneurial journey, as well as for those listeners who are participating right now. I served in the Marine Corps Reserve, like you noted, and was deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom 2. The transformational part of it wasn't the deployment itself, it was what happened when I got home. And so I was in the middle of earning my master's degree from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And I jokingly tell people I took a gap year to go spend it in Iraq. And
Not your typical gap year.
No, it's not your typical gap year experience. But when I came back to the university, which I proudly support, so for those who aren't watching right now, I have a Tennessee hat on. The university, the people there were incredibly supportive of me as a military member and as a veteran and as a student, but they were wildly underprepared or unprepared to support my needs as a transitioning veteran. And so that's where my passion for engaging and supporting the military connected community was born. And I've I've dedicated the majority of my professional career in that, and it's also led to all kinds of other opportunities, both inside and outside the military connected community. But if I had to point back to a seminal moment in my 20s that really influenced my trajectory for good, it would be when I came home from Iraq, and not necessarily the deployment itself.
You said that your university and maybe the people around you were underprepared to help with your transition. Underprepared in what way?
Yeah,
And maybe you can kind of flesh a little bit of that out, as well as talk about maybe where we draw the line of like whose responsibility it is for transition. What lies on behalf of the people around us and the organizations that we are a part of, and then what is it that we need to own to kind of like show up and be putting our best foot forward, I guess.
it's a great question. So when I separated, transition was a 2 or 3 day PowerPoint, and that's all it was. And it was, you're drinking from the fire hose. Here's all the information you need to know. Good luck. Today's transition experience, while still not meeting all of the service members' needs, is a far better improvement. You have to look at your transition from a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset, that the transition from the military to the civilian sector is a growth opportunity, both professionally and personally. When I talk to transitioning service members, I tell them that transition is not an event, it's a journey. And those that are able to embrace the journey and understand that there's going to be peaks and valleys to that tend to do better, and to embrace the ambiguity that comes with it, in trying to figure out where you're going to live, what meaningful employment opportunity are you going to have, what's going to happen with your family. For oftentimes in my sector, it's how do I manage a full-time schoolwork while I'm earning my undergraduate degree, while working, while raising a family. Those are very difficult things to try and manage. And at the university level, it was so early in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that they didn't know what they didn't know. And it looks very different today. For example, the mental well-being needs of transitioning service members, addressing um, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, anxiety and adjustment, military sexual trauma, like all of these things can come out in a university or collegiate environment, and their staff may or may not be prepared to respond to that. There's also just a matter of the GI Bill, which is a very different program today versus when I was in school, and it pays a lot more. In some scenarios, it can pay for all of your education. And so, for an institution that really values enrolling student veterans, you want to ensure that if they value enrolling student veterans and they say that, then you want to see where are they putting that GI Bill money into their school. Are they reinvesting it back into programming for military connected students like spouses? Are they offering things like childcare, right? Because for today's student veteran, we're more likely to be married with children and working part-time or full-time. In terms of the ownership, um, I do see it as it starts with the individual service member. And again, like I started off in answering your question, it's about the lens by which you look at your transition.
One thing that I don't think that is really talked about, or at least I don't hear people talk about it, the differences in going through that transition period as a reservist from active duty. When I was going through the Navy TAPS class, which is a very similar thing, I'm guessing, week long PowerPoint, drinking from the hose type
Hmm.
operation. In my class, there was a large handful of reservists that were in there. And I was curious and I asked, I was like, why are you guys in here? Are you guys all actually getting out at the same time that we are? And they said, no, they go through that transition class when they come back from deployment. So they
Mhm.
had just got back from a year in Africa and were like on this integration thing, and I was like, oh man, like that's a very different type of transition than somebody like myself, and probably harder, I'd even argue, because I've been living for 4 years as my 9 to 5, my everything is the military. And there's not even a corner of my life that's not affected by that. Whereas you have like been completely immersed in this for 1 year and then are just immediately dropped back into it.
Mhm.
There's not really, it's an even harsher kind of drop off. And I sympathize with that. I think that that would probably be tremendously harder than maybe even a traditional active duty transition, I guess.
It's definitely different. It's definitely different. And what I wasn't didn't understand at the time was as a military reservist, you're transitioning back into the civilian sector once a month. So you go and you go from, in my case, a very academic environment from, your dorm, and you put the Marine Corps uniform back on and you go, I don't know, do all kinds of crazy stuff for your training. And then you come back, you take it off, and the next day you're back in class talking about politics or whatever issue you've got homework or lab work. And it was difficult for me to try and compartmentalize that in my this would have been my early to mid 20s. But learning how to compartmentalize that was eventually it helped me to better understand how to organize your and differentiate between your professional and your personal life. But you're absolutely right. The transition experience is different for military reservists, although I think the shared experience that we have in the military crosses over whether you're reserve or active or guard that we all have. And there are still elements of that transition that we all share as well. I try and when I talk with transitioning service members, I try and get them to think of themselves as a cultural exchange student. And from going from the military to the civilian sector is like going into a different culture as a cultural exchange student. That you're about to go, from school in the US to a school in a different country. And to thrive in that, you need to immerse yourself in that culture and think about all of the preparatory work that you would do to be successful in that. It's the same principles apply when you're transitioning to the civilian sector.
This may be getting a little bit ahead of myself here because I think that the answer to this question might be in a lot of what you do now today
Mhm.
with your business. But how is it that you think that we can get across to people in these other organizations, whether it be your school, your family, your friends? How do we communicate to them the unease of being constantly kind of moved around and coming back into a life that maybe doesn't feel like your own? I think that hearing your story, you are now more sympathetic to that because of having gone through the deployment. You're like, oh, now this is affecting me. Like, I get it. I'm reminded of when I was coming back from deployment, you had the option to bring out family members for the last 3 days before we pulled in. They give a chance to like, you see your family, they bring them on the boat, they get the cruise on the ship for 3 days and it's,
Mhm.
whatever. And I remember my mom talking to me and they have to sleep in like the accommodations on the ship and
Do they
like
really?
it's the whole like family immersion thing.
Huh.
I brought out my mom and dad. My dad was super jazzed because he's former Navy, a different type of ship, but like it was kind of like a reminiscent like throwback for him. My mother, on the other hand, was like, I have earned an entirely new appreciation for everything that you guys do. Like you guys are suffering out here. These beds, she still complains about her back hurting to this day from the sleep that she got in the ship.
Yeah.
That's like 3 days. I'm like, yeah, that's what I've been dealing with for 7 months. Like
Yeah.
but my point in all that is it really takes some immense exposure to even grasp what is being dealt with
Yeah.
there. So to
It
come back
takes,
to my question,
yeah,
how do we communicate that better?
what you described is called what I would call radical empathy, and understanding what we experience, and based on that, having a very deeply personal connection to it, that you can actually recall what that experience was like and recognize that and empathize with that to kind of facilitate that exchange. So let's acknowledge that there are misperceptions about our community in the workplace, in the private sector, in the public sector, etc. I think for me, the the one thing that is going to overcome those misperceptions is leadership. And I encourage if you're listening right now, or for those that I've interacted with, I tell them, like, we are, as a community, we are called to lead, either in the workplace, in our families, in our communities, that the only way for those with misperceptions about us to understand the truth is for us to engage with them, and to demonstrate how those perceptions are misinformed. For many of us, and I'm sensitive to this, talking about our military experience is the last thing we want to do. You're done with it. You took your uniform off. You don't even want to identify as a veteran. You don't check that box if you're applying for the scholarship or applying for the job. I get it, and I 100% respect that. When the time is right, though, and there's an opportunity in a workplace relationship or personal friendship, I would encourage you, for those of you who don't want to self-identify, to open up about your experience, because what I have found is the more open that I am about what I experienced in the Marines and afterwards, the more I have in common with people that I work with and with the clients that we represent. And it leads to a much healthier dialogue with those individuals.
I think that that's right. And finding that common ground, I think, is probably a really important factor in kind of your reintegration. Like, the people that you've had something in common with are other people who are in, the people that you've shared a rack with, the people that you've been sleeping on the ground with for however long, the people you've been eating with, and you kind of need those lines out into the water of kind of the civilian population again to get linked back up with those people. And I think that there's probably more that people won't know the ins and outs, and they're not going to know all the regulations and all this stuff, but I think that there is more in common there than I think most
Sure.
people realize. But some people really want to get on their high horse and say, oh, like, you'd never understand,
Yeah,
and
look, Brock, notice what I didn't say. I didn't say, well, they owe it to us because we're the ones who served. Or essentially, I would hope that what you heard was the opposite of an entitlement mentality. Was that rather an obligation mentality? I don't expect people to, and the American public in particular, I don't expect that they owe me anything just because I served. If anything, it was a privilege to be able to serve, because, as you can see, even nowadays, it's a challenge to get into the military. And many people who want to join the military can't. They're disqualified for certain reasons, and sometimes it's for reasons that are beyond their own capability or responsibility. Yeah, I think looking at it from, I would challenge you and your listeners in saying that as a community, we're obligated to go out and to demonstrate our value as citizens and as leaders.
a few minutes ago you mentioned the GI Bill and
Mhm.
talking about the different circumstances that can pay for school, and you kind of hinted and alluded to the differences and how it is to now. I'd like to use that as an opportunity to, like, dive into that. After your time in the Marines, you went on to work at the VA
Yeah.
for some time, serving variety of roles, worked as an analyst all the way up to assistant director of GI Bill oversight. Can
Yeah.
you give us a little bit of history, maybe about the GI Bill, the differences that you saw during your time, and anything impactful that really happened during that time?
Anything impactful? Well, it was like 10 years at VA, so we're not going to be able to cover everything, but we can definitely talk about some of the highlights. And before I do that, most of us understand that the GI Bill was in response to World War II, and it was signed by President Roosevelt. The genesis behind the GI Bill actually goes to after World War One in 1918, when veterans of World War One marched on Washington and the Capitol because the federal government had not honored their pension, their promised pension from service. It's called the Bonus Army March. And they actually, if you think, if you've seen protests today, they kind of pale in comparison to the Bonus Army, which literally camped out in front of the Capitol. And these are military veterans, right? So people who were conscripted or volunteered to serve in World War One. And at the time, the the public stance was service in the military was a citizen's obligation, and you should not expect anything in return for that. The entire concept of around having a healthcare and a benefits infrastructure was very nascent. The bonus army, in a very violent time in our history, was actually cleared out by the US military. And the imagery from that and the public backlash was to such an extent that people said, never again. We're never going to do that again. We're never going to honor our military veterans again. And we do not want to have that type of societal unrest. So now we move forward to World War II. And in understanding what took place after World War One, the public policy concern was, if we have 15 million men and women demobilizing at the same time, what do we do with that? Like, where do those people go? What can we provide so that there's no sort of like economic imbalance? Because that's a significant input into the American labor force, and you didn't have a plan for it. So the concept of the GI Bill was started while we were still at war. And the first mention of a GI Bill, or it wasn't called the GI Bill at the time, but of a comprehensive benefit package for World War II veterans, was announced by President Roosevelt in a fireside chat. And it was about 1943 or 44. And a year later, the GI Bill became law, and it was led in part by the American Legion. I would say that we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the Legion for spearheading that. The GI Bill paid for school. It helped you purchase a house. It provided unemployment insurance, and a variety of other benefits. And it was and has been the most impactful social benefit program in American history. That for every dollar the World War II GI Bill paid, America received $7 in return in increased tax revenue. So it also completely transformed America's system of higher education. Entire schools doubled or tripled in size because of the number of women and men who enrolled in school because of the GI Bill. As we moved from a conscription to an all volunteer force, the Congress took away small slices of the GI Bill so that it became, I would say, this is my personal opinion, a shell of its former self, a very small amount. When I was in school, I got $300 a month. Okay. And 9/11, 2001 was a catalyst for our country and for the military. And because the active duty, reserve, and guard were essentially all one operational force in fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan for what would be, 20 years, that the need for a more robust education benefit package was out there. When I came back to the University of Tennessee, I was accepted into a program called the Presidential Management Fellows Program. which is a internship program that's sponsored by the Office of Personnel Management, and they place you in mid-level executive roles across the federal government. You have to have a master's degree in order to get in. So I was placed in, I found this opportunity at VA in the office that administered the GI Bill, and I was a legislative analyst. And the first assignment I had was analyzing this piece of legislation from then Senator Jim Webb, who was a Vietnam veteran, former Secretary of the Navy. He was the junior senator from Virginia, and his son was a Marine. And his son, I think at the time, was serving in Iraq. And he modeled a new GI Bill for a new century. He modeled it after the World War II GI Bill. And you have to understand at the time, there weren't a lot of people using the GI Bill like you see today, and it wasn't really paying a lot. It was probably maybe 2 or 300,000, and with an outlay of maybe $3 billion annually. So when we did the analysis of this piece of legislation, we estimated it was going to cost $100 billion over 10 years. And we all laughed and said, there's no way in hell this is going to become law. And a year later, it was law. And what started was a journey in essentially creating a benefit program that tripled in size from what we had been doing. And we had about 18 months to do it. So that's getting into VA. But if if you have any, I just want to stop there. If you have any follow-up questions to that, and we can talk about my time at VA.
No, that's all good stuff. I have read about the GI Bill and obviously have been a recipient of it. It's a absolutely tremendous program, and the benefits are really, really fantastic. Really, no reason why people shouldn't be using them.
Mhm.
I didn't know some of those finer details, though. I think that it's worth going back and highlighting the point that you made there, that the amount of dollars invested in the World War II one, like it was $1 of investment returned $7
Mhm.
to that is so tremendous, because you're investing in people who have spent their time and lives investing in the country, and like here's like an actual dollar figure returned because we're embedding these qualified and capable people to lead and become more educated in the country. That's so cool.
It is, and it continues today. It really highlights the transformative power of higher education. It demonstrates just how hungry we are to better ourselves, to improve ourselves. And by the way, I don't think veterans are exclusive to this. I think every American, everybody who's here wants to better themselves, and pursuing a degree is one of the ways to do that. And anytime we have an opportunity to remove those barriers to access, that we should seriously consider it, and we should do so. We know that millions are using the GI Bill today, but we don't know the return on the ROI yet. We've probably got to get another 10 or 15 years before we can do a really effective longitudinal study. But I wouldn't be surprised to see a similar number for every dollar we get, $7 back. I would not be surprised if we saw a favorable ROI for the money that we're spending on the GI Bill. I would not.
Well, and if it is similar, I just kind of pulled up an article from defense.gov. This is articles back from 2019, but it was talking about the 75-year anniversary of the
Yeah.
GI Bill, and the closing sentences. There's a bunch more here, and I'll be sure to include the link in the show notes. But the closing paragraph reads as follows: there are a few versions from which to choose nowadays, with the most used being the post 9/11 GI Bill. Since its implementation in August 2009, the Department of Veterans Affairs has provided educational benefits to nearly 800,000 veterans and their families, totaling more than $12 billion.
Hmm.
So
So not
a
a not
similar
a
ROI on
yeah,
like a much
yeah,
larger dollar figure,
yeah.
like the benefits.
It was
uh,
a bit scary at the time, I'll tell you, Brock, because I mean we didn't have any experience. I was the smart Alex, not nosed recent college graduate. Everybody in the office was older than me, and they're like, "Congratulations, you now have the most comprehensive change to your program in 70 years. You know, your budget to do this is pretty extensive, but you're going to go from you need to expect to triple your workload to triple the number of employees that you have and to triple your outlays. And you have really, it was really just 12 months to make it happen. It was a massive lift. It was.
That's so fantastic, though. All of that work was certainly not in vain, and I think that we still see like the benefits of that.
Yeah.
I do have one more question about education,
Yeah.
maybe for people in general, but maybe specifically veterans, and then I want to hear about your time in the VA. The bar for education has slowly continued to rise.
Mhm.
An undergraduate degree is almost table stakes, and I don't want to discount how important trade work is. And like the last couple of years, we're certainly starting to see the pinch on trade work and a lot of people not opting to go for like the manual labor route and stuff to their benefit or demise. I don't know. Those guys make a lot of money too.
Mhm.
Um, how do you see maybe this continuous need for more and more education impacting veterans over the next 20 or 30 years? We've got the post
Yeah,
9/11.
I can only give you a speculative answer here because I don't have any data to inform my response. I will say that based on what we know today, women veterans who earn a degree are overrepresented compared to women in the military. Meaning, if the U.S. Armed Forces are, approximately 16 to 17% identify as women, then the percent who go and earn a degree using the GI Bill or something something else, a scholarship, could be anywhere from 25 to 30%. So I think the growth in the number of women who leave the military and earn a degree, I think that's going to continue. So I think that the military veteran population is going to continue to get to look younger and much more diverse by gender, by race and sexual orientation as well. You have another question?
I was just kind of, I don't know if this is in the same vein of that, and if this is like not really where that's going, then I'll just cut this segment. But does that imply that, because obviously there's a large portion of dependents that are using the GI Bill of the person, of the actual
Hmm.
service member. Do you think that we will like that number will grow and to the point of like equaling? Like you're saying that women are
Oh
overrepresented.
yeah.
Is that going to work up to whatever the actual amount of service members that are women?
No, so what I mean is, I see where you're going with that, and I'll acknowledge that in just a moment. What I'm suggesting is that the more women who serve will be more represented in higher education and pursuing a degree. Okay.
I got you.
I I think that trend's going to continue. The interesting thing, like you noted, like you said about the GI Bill, is that you can transfer it to a family member. What I want your listeners to understand is what that really means as an obligation. So and I know people are going to correct me here who are listening, but the last Civil War pensioner, the last person to have received a pension from VA from the Civil War was a dependent, and she passed away in 2016. When our country goes to war, we create an obligation that is going to last generations. I believe that we will be paying GI Bill benefits as they are today for people who are going to be alive in the 22nd century. That we need to be looking at what is the horizon in 2080 and 2090? That's the more interesting question for me. I still fervently believe in the value of an undergraduate degree. I think it's the great equalizer. Okay. I will always believe in the power of higher education. It's at the same time, Higher education is only as valuable as the amount of time and energy that you put into it. Okay. There is a role and a place for trade jobs that will always be in our country. And I value that. And I advocate for that where I think it's in that person's best interest and where I think it's appropriate. Like you said, it can be very lucrative, especially when you combine it into like your own business and a business opportunity. You can do really well. I am interested in seeing what the effect of the gig economy, artificial intelligence, and automation are going to have on both our economy and in the value of a degree. I don't know what that's going to be or what it's going to look like. I'm not a futurist. I read, that stuff and I'm really interested in it. But my advice for if you're in this industry now or if you're a policymaker is to practice strategic flexibility in responding to those needs. If you have to be a gig worker or a gig, business owner, an AI programmer, or a video game designer, or heck, even there are going to be whole ecosystems in a virtual world that we haven't even thought of yet that are going to require some type of higher education. I want to make sure that the GI Bill is able to help you earn that, whatever that, if it's a credential, if it's a degree, whatever it is, to be able to have that opportunity. So I think policymakers and higher education professionals need to be flexible in responding to that. Maybe we weren't gonna go that far in the future, but that's kind of where I'm at.
No, I'm with you. I like that. I think that it is good to think optimistically and be optimistic about the future
Sure,
and be planning for that. However, we need to that shouldn't take away from doing things today
correct.
too.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to dive into a little bit of your time at the VA and maybe what you learned or took away from your 9 or 10 years that you worked
Yes.
there.
When I talk to transitioning service members, I tell them that if you can start your career in the federal sector, do it. And if you can start your career at VA, definitely consider it for a variety of reasons. Number one, there's stability and growth and advancement opportunities within the federal workforce. Number two, very competitive pay and benefits compared to the private sector. Number three, and most important, is the VA is the second largest department in the federal government, right behind DoD. I think I said this to you offline in our first conversation. I think VA has the best mission in the federal sector to care for those who have borne the battle and the widow and the orphan. The challenges that you face and the complexity of the problems that you have to solve while at VA or another federal agency thus far have paled in comparison to what I have faced as an entrepreneur. If you can succeed in the federal sector, and especially at VA, I promise you, you can succeed anywhere. And it has been, it's so when I'm reflecting back on my time at VA, it is a remarkably similar experience to being an entrepreneur. If you're given a piece of legislation and a program to implement at a federal level with millions of American citizens and you have White House level involvement, the pressure doesn't really get any higher than that. Like that's a very challenging thing to do. And nobody there really has the expertise in building out a program essentially from scratch. So you're all just kind of figuring it out on your own and you're all working together to build out this program. And that's what we did with the post 9/11 GI Bill. We did not meet our community's expectations when we launched the post 9/11 GI Bill. There were significant delays and screw ups when we launched it. And that was because of some ineffective and inefficient planning on our part. But our response to that, I still think is one of the best stories never told, is we were taking anywhere from 3 to 4 months to pay students. And by the time I left, we were turning around payments within 25 days. There's a lot of work that goes into IT and SOPs and process development, et cetera. And having that experience and that engagement for so many years was just across the board applied very well to the things that I did after VA. And finally, because there are advancement opportunities, you will have an opportunity to lead people just like I did. And I sucked at leading people. When I first started as a team leader, I thought that my model from the Marine Corps would be, a one-to-one, transition right there. And I did not account for the what motivates employees. I did not account for generational differences in the workplace. I didn't account for politics in the workplace, right? Because when you're in the military, it can be apolitical, right? And I had to learn a lot of those lessons the hard way in how to be an effective leader, which I still apply today at my company. Yes, getting into the federal sector is difficult. Yes, going through USA jobs is a pain in the butt. Yes, you will find people who fit that bureaucratic stereotype that you see in comics and on TV. You will find that. But for the majority of those you interact with, and for the sense of accomplishment that you're going to do together, it's hard to find an experience that compares to that, except for your time in the military. It could be an outstanding cohort experience for you. And for those listening, I just want them to know that every day there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who work at VA who wake up in the morning and say, I want to go give my best effort for military veterans. I understand the narrative that's out there about VA, and some of that's deserved. I get it. For the most part, the majority of people that I interacted with at VA, they're just as mission focused as that Marine grunt who has to take that hill.
It's interesting you talk about the stress level
Mhm.
involved in implementing policy that affects, millions of people. I find that I don't know if comical is the right word. It's comical not in the sense of like degrading your experience, but
Mhm.
comical in the sense that you're coming from an infantry background in the Marines who
Yeah.
spent time, no doubt, leading troops in Iraq. Like
Mhm.
that is crazy to compare and contrast those two things. And I think probably for those of us who haven't done either of those things, I think probably serves to really put it into perspective how much weight is sitting on your shoulders with problems
It's
like that.
intimidating to know, to sleep with the knowledge that that the program you're building is going to be responsible for the welfare of a family and individuals. That is a weighty prospect. It's a different kind of pressure from, you know, engaging enemy contact and closing with. I guess you could say the pucker factor is a little different in that case, but the the responsibility that we had at the time wasn't lost on us, and everybody really is trying to give their best effort in that moment to make it happen, despite how sometimes federal civil servants are shown in the public.
I think it's very easy as a veteran to complain about service that you get at the VA or any related service, whether it be a hospital, whether it be a GI Bill, whether any type of VA sponsored service. But it is so encouraging to me to talk to people like you saying that. A few episodes ago, I spoke with Maureen Elias, who
Yeah,
works at the VA currently, and
she just got sworn in, I believe.
yes,
Yeah,
deputy chief of staff, big
yeah,
deal.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, super cool. But talking to those people, and you just can see, like when I was talking with her, I could see the light in her eyes talking about giving back to the veteran community, and like that's who you want fighting for you.
Yeah.
Like that's I feel good knowing that we have people like that fighting for us.
I feel the same way, and I think the world of Maureen, if she's listening, good luck in that role at VA. But they have a very fine person in Maureen. Let's be transparent and honest here. I'm also a client, quote unquote, of VA. I use I receive a disability payment. I utilize the hospital side. Navigating VA, it is a labyrinth. It is incredibly difficult. There was a lawyer on Twitter, and he started this tweet with, I am one of the world's experts in such and such law, and I have just spent 9 months trying to navigate VA. And if I can't do it, I can only imagine what somebody who's not a lawyer. So VA doesn't make it, any easier on itself. And for those of you who are like, why is it so complicated? I don't understand. So there's an answer to that. Number one, you have systems built on systems. So the GI Bill system that process payments for literally, processing payments in the bank and sending it to your bank account was built on a coding language that existed before you and I were born. And the system itself was built in the 1970s. And because if Congress says you have to enact this now, there's no like starting from scratch. You have no option but to build it on the pre-existing system and to make it work. The other thing is just the risk aversion, which comes with working in the federal sector. You're often, you could be the subject of a lawsuit, and you have to be very careful when Congress passes a law and a change to a program, it goes to VA for it to write the regulations around it. And the regulations have to stick within what the congressional intent was. And so they have to be as specific as possible, which leads to very, very burdensome and complicated requirements in order to qualify for a program, and time to process those applications that come in. And finally, when you work at VA, you don't have one boss. You have what is it, like 438? You have 100 bosses in the Senate, 328 in the House, and any one of them can stop your work with a letter to the secretary or to the White House. So even at that level, it adds further complexity. So I go back to how I started the answer is the level of complexity and the challenges and the problems that you have to solve really pale in comparison, especially in trying to start up a business.
Initiating change in any form of government related entity is like incredibly difficult, even when you're a part of it.
Mhm.
Like coming in and saying, hey, I want to change how this is done. Like you don't just do that. It takes a lot of firepower and rank and money and all of these things to make that happen. Hearing you talk about a lot of these outdated systems it sounds like, and I'd be willing to bet that there is a lot of systems that the VA uses that are ripe for disruption and waiting for an inspired entrepreneur to come in and redo their payment system or come up with a better way to do things for them. Is that even possible? We're going to talk startups and stuff in a minute, but
Yeah,
I'm thinking about the integration of those two and how hard that is to do.
I think it's possible if VA is willing to accept that as a possibility and they're open to that. I think it is unlikely because of the requirements that the federal government has in contracting with the private sector, that it is unlikely that a startup is going to be approved for a million or billion-dollar contract to go in and rebuild those systems. I think it's more likely that a more well-established company would be responsible for that. However, there are business opportunities within the margins that I'm starting to see the startup community fill in. ID.B is a good example. There are some others that I don't want to mention because they are in the startup phase that are kind of dealing with benefits that VA administers. I don't see a lot of entrepreneurial activity around the healthcare side of VA because I think it's just so they're actually comparatively the VA's integrated healthcare system performs far better than the private sector healthcare, both in patient satisfaction and in outcomes. For them, the challenge is getting enrolled into it. That's the challenge for us. But I do see opportunities around right now. There's a lot of work in trying to track wellness, performance, and healthcare of athletes at the professional and the collegiate level. I'm very interested to see if there's an opportunity to do the same for the soldier who's deployed and the long-term impact what it's going to have on their wellness and their health and well-being. So like I said, kind of within those margins, I think there are areas of opportunity, but I wouldn't get your hopes up on being the next Microsoft who's going to get $1 billion contract with the DoD or VA or something like that.
Well, let's take that as a segue and talk startups for a minute. I'd love to
Yeah,
hear about where you got interested in startups and building your own company. You've
yeah,
participated in a couple really notable programs, Bunker Labs and Stanford's Ignite program.
yeah,
Love to hear about your origins there, and then talk about those programs and what they
yeah.
offer.
I'd be happy to. So during my time at VA and within the nonprofit sector, I heard the same feedback from stakeholders over and over, which was we struggle marketing to the military connected community. And they were coming to VA and SVA, Student Veterans of America, for help in that. And I thought, I think there might be a business opportunity there to teach you how to do that or to help you do that as a public relations firm. So I had this idea of a company that was focused on the military connected community and representing it for about a decade, really, maybe like a little less than a decade. I was approaching 40 when I was at Student Veterans of America. And, for those of you listening, you're supposed to date your business idea before you marry it. And I just eloped. I did not do that. I I turned in my 2 week notice to my boss. I said, I founded this company called Evocati. It's a really weird name. I'll explain it in a moment. And I'm going to go see if I can do it. And that was in 2018, and we're still in business. I do not have a business background. My background is in higher ed administration and political science. I had no idea what the hell I was doing, none whatsoever. But I had a business idea. So I was in a personal position to do that because of the significant support that I had from my spouse and our family. Okay, so I recognize that not everybody can do that, and we can talk about how to be an entrepreneur and manage your current job if you want to go into that subject. But Evocati is Latin for reservist, and the Evocatus were the first recorded instance in classical Rome of a force of reserve. They were retired legionnaires that Emperor Caesar Augustus kept on payroll, and they were there at his disposal, and they could be recalled to service ostensibly to protect the empire, but really to protect the emperor. And they were called the Evocati. I liked that idea because it's what I was in the military, and for us in our branding, we didn't. I had a couple rules. I did not want a military themed name. I did not want an eagle in my logo, and I didn't want it to be red, white, and blue. I didn't want
Hey,
any of that. Yeah,
be careful trashing Eagles in the
I know,
logos
I know, I
because
know, I know. It's all over the place, and I get it. I love them for it. Team RWB has a fantastic brand, and I also didn't want to be in a place where it looked like I was emulating that. I wanted something that spoke to my own experience. So we founded Evocati in 2018. So the advice that I would give you all who are thinking about doing this is give yourself permission to fail. So I told my wife and myself really that if this company isn't profitable within a year, I'm going to stop and I'm going to go back into the private sector. And it sounds counterintuitive, but that actually took a huge weight off my shoulders. I had a horizon, I had a deadline, I had a goal to reach, and I've just kind of been, I've had that attitude ever since then is give yourself permission to fail in all that you do in this journey. I also knew that I wanted to be the best entrepreneur and the best founder for the company and for the people who would eventually work at Evocati. So I was connected into Bunker Labs and their Veterans in Residence program, which is an incubator program for military connected entrepreneurs. And I highly recommend those of you listening to go and bunkerlabs.org, look up where your local chapter is and get involved. That's going to provide a network of like-minded entrepreneurs that you can run ideas by, that you can socialize with, that you can, you know, fundraise with, and support the growth of your business. Stanford Ignite, their post 9/11 program, entrepreneurship and innovation for veterans program, is an intensive masterclass essentially that is provided through Stanford's Graduate School of Business. It's an MBA in 30 days is how I would describe it. And you are within a cohort of 40 to 50. It is done virtually now. It was done in person on Stanford's campus. Because of the pandemic, they went virtual. It worked out so well that they're actually going to maintain a virtual class. And you are going to learn the fundamentals of design thinking, entrepreneurship, innovation, fundraising, business valuation, and accounting from literally the world experts. That the people that they can bring to the table are the ones who were in the room when Facebook started or Google started. And you're there with them. And I cannot say enough about that program. I highly recommend if you're like me and you feel like you have no idea what you're doing, you never went to business school, but you want to learn the fundamentals, that's a great program for you to participate in. And to a T, every faculty member we interacted with said, we love this program because we love working with veterans and we love teaching you all and hearing about your business ideas. So I can say unequivocally that the Stanford faculty that you are engaged with in that program are invested in your success. And these are people who are the leading experts in business. It's a privilege to be in that program. So I recommend that as well. So I'll stop there. Any other questions about Evocati or what that or the programs that I was involved in?
I want to talk some more about Evocati here in just a minute. I have
Yeah,
a couple questions on Stanford Ignite and the Bunker Labs.
yeah.
You're talking about Stanford Ignite as kind of a fundamental crash course in business and starting a business, running a
Mhm.
business, fundraising, etc. What from the Ignite program did you learn that we can see in your business today?
You need to be able to clearly articulate your value proposition to anybody. You know, that's going to separate you from your competitors. It's going to differentiate you from your competitors. It's going to help you capture leads. It's going to help you capture clients or customers. It's what you're going to say when you're going to go fundraise. It's what you say when you do podcasts like this. It's going to be a talking point that you use in your interview. And it has to be clear, it has to be articulate, it has to be understood. Evocati is a public relations company that helps military connected clients research, market, and grow their investment within their community. That's what we do. And that's our value proposition. So that's one of the things that I took away from Stanford that I internalized. And a great value proposition is worth every penny, and spending time on it is worth it as well. In addition, or I would say in complement to that is, what's the problem that you're trying to solve, right? And how is that different from your competitors? For us at Evocati, we want to help clients, especially clients who are in underserved or underrepresented communities, research, market, and grow their impact either within their community or without their community, meaning to the public at large. And what we've discovered is a lot of the work that's happening locally, for example, we talk about a historically Black college and university that's doing really good things for students. That's a very local story. But what we found is there's a national appetite to tell those stories and to amplify them as well. But to answer your question, I think value proposition is key, and you can't spend enough time thinking about that.
Well, and from what I know and understand of starting a business, I don't think that you can hope to solve a problem if you aren't intimately connected and understand what's driving that, the stakeholders involved, and what a potential solution might look like. Because especially with military related things, we've been around for so long. There are reasons why things are the way that they are. A lot of
Yeah.
rules written in blood, and you really just need to understand the problem. So I think that that's a good thing to walk away with that program.
Yeah.
Uh,
It requires an effective feedback loop between you and your client or you and your customers so you're able to respond to their needs. You're absolutely right.
I would love for you to kind of walk us down the road of Evocati's value proposition. You've kind of explained and articulated a little bit, but I think that the best way to really understand what you guys do in like the sense of like starting a business wise, but then also like as maybe a potential customer, I think it might be helpful if you walked us through the story of you consulting and working with, is it the University of Fayetteville?
Hmm.
I would love for you to tell us that story and kind of what was your mindset going through the whole, just give us the full spiel
Hmm.
on the University of Fayetteville.
Yeah, and I apologize. It's Fayetteville State University,
Fayetteville.
FSU. Um, as I joke with others, the real FSU. So if you're a Seminole listening right now, I'm not going to apologize to you. Yeah, it's a really good question. So again, talking about that feedback loop, what we started as was really in kind of consulting. It was built around my own capabilities, right? So a lot of us will start a consulting company, and it's really just talking about the things and subjects that we know about to our clients. And that was in 2018 and 2019 and 2020. What I realized was we had to divide the company into two in order to respond to our client needs, but also to track revenue, as to better track revenue that was coming in. So that's when I created two vertically integrated business lines, Evocati Creative, which is the agency of record and the PR side of the house, and Evocati Growth, which is the consulting side. For Evocati Creative, we serve as your agency of record, and I'll talk about what that looks like in a moment. For Evocati Growth, that is the consulting side where we would come in on a project by project basis to do some type of research or assessment for your company or for your institution. For example, if a school wanted to be able to recruit more student veterans, they needed to understand how did they compare to their peer institutions. That's how the opportunity with FSU started. Was they had a chancellor who came in and he was very forward looking. He understood the value that military connected students provide, and he wanted to take the steps to be a premier institution for all military connected students, not just an HBCU, but for all schools and students. But he didn't know how his university compared to his peers in North Carolina and across the country. So he contracted with us and Evocati to do an analysis and a report using, I think it was like 26 or 28 different variables that showcased where FSU compared to its HBCU peers, as well as its peer institutions within the region. And what we found is that FSU compared favorably, if not exceptional, to all these other institutions in terms of its support for military connected students. And they published that report, and it was very well received. So what the chancellor decided based on that report was to increase his institution's investment into military connected students. And they came to our company and said, hey, we're going to make an announcement and we need a PR firm to help us amplify this to the nation. And I was like, well, I happen to have a PR firm. Let's see what's happening. And they told us, and they said, we are going to announce that for any undergraduate military connected student, he or she will be able to attend for free, so no tuition fees. I'm talking about you, Brock. I'm talking about your future kid or your current kid. I don't know if you have kids, regardless of when you served. Right.
That's a big offer.
It's a huge offer. So of course, on the PR side, we jumped all like that is a very easy sell, as we told them. Like, we're not going to
Right.
have any trouble getting people interested in that.
You're not coming out and saying you're laying off half the staff. It's
Right, right.
we're giving free school away.
Yeah. So we pitched it to a very well respected and somebody I admire, a reporter at the Washington Post, and she wrote a great story about FSU and announcing this military connected. It's a military scholarship. Can't quite remember the name of it. And we went down to Fort Bragg and we participated in announcing it. I'm speaking figuratively here. The response to that announcement was so overwhelming that their phone lines melted. What I mean is, the phone line was so busy, you couldn't even get through to leave a message because people were so interested in this scholarship. And a close colleague at FSU who I've worked with for a while, she recounted a story to us, to our team, and we got very emotional listening to this. But she said she had a Vietnam veteran, father of three, who had no idea how he was going to pay for school for his kids. And he heard about this through our work. It must have been through a local story or something. And he called to say they're going to go to FSU, and now I know how they're going to go to school. And thank you for opening up this opportunity. It was really wonderful to be a part of that, and that work continues.
How powerful is that? Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So where we're at today as a company is what I've been able to observe and looking at down the line is we don't see as much opportunity in the consulting world as we had kind of assumed. And those opportunities are somewhat dependent on the health of America's economy. Okay. Where we do see opportunity is in being an agency of record and engaging in storytelling opportunities for our clients. We think that's going to be the best place, and we think that's an opportunity to really disrupt the industry. I'm excited about some things that we're going to be sharing soon that I can't share here, but if this podcast gets released in August or September, you can go on our website and probably read about it now.
How exciting. I'll be watching for those things. Did you raise money for Evocati or did you self-fund it?
And thanks for asking this question because this is a topic that I've noticed in our community. It's not well understood. It's something that I learned a lot about when I was at Stanford. The answer is no. I I went in with the idea because I'm a stubborn Marine. I went in with the idea that saying I'm not going to take on any debt financing. I'm not going to do any fundraising, but the company has to stand on its own because I don't know. I guess I felt like I needed the challenge. There's no compelling reason for it. It was really just to kind of prove the business idea. So no, we haven't taken on any debt financing. We haven't borrowed any money to build out the company. We do have a certain revenue mark that we want to hit before we go and fundraise. And that's certainly something that we are in conversations about today. Where we're at as a company is how do we focus on our core value proposition of public relations and where are the areas that we can diversify revenue streams for the company so that we can weather economic downturns and also grow our client base. That being said, there is a incredible ecosystem for military veteran entrepreneurs to fundraise. It's out there. There are VC companies that work exclusively on funding veteran startups, and I plan to tap into them when we're ready to do it. And you will find a community that is very open and willing to whatever pitch that you want to give, as well as connecting you with fundraising opportunities.
Do you mind calling some of those out? I'd love to include them in the show
Yeah,
notes if you could.
there's hivers and strivers. There's two more. I tell you what, Brock, can I email them to you so you can put it in
Yeah.
the description? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd
sounds
be
good.
great. I don't know how much of this you can share.
Mhm.
You said that you were profitable in the very first year. Can you maybe walk us through a little bit of the economics of what an agency business does If you can share revenue numbers, great. If not, what are you trying to do? You said
Yeah.
that you're looking to hit a certain milestone. Walk us
Yes.
through kind of some of the economics of the business.
Yeah. So I won't share numbers, but I will say that we're looking in the seven figure range, right? Seven figures and above for revenue. I have found that trying to determine your pricing model when you're in a service industry, for a product industry, you can do it, right? For a service industry, especially in PR, it varies wildly. And typically, there are different models out there. You can price it basically your service based on an hourly rate, based on the associate level of the employee who works on your PR. There's the retainer model, so they pay a fee up front, and then you can use this company at any time, and then they'll just shoot you an invoice for however many hours that you are billed. Right now, the model that we're doing, which we like, is the subscription model, which is all you can eat from the services that we offer for a monthly fee. And we offer a warranty for our work. We also say that you can cancel for any reason with 60-day notice. In return, we prefer to have longer term contracts with our clients because that allows us to build out a very good rapport and relationship with them. And it just means in the end, we're much more effective for them in telling their story. In terms of the items that we do at Evocati, our services are broken up into different offerings. We have message and material development, which is building out your social media, building out your press releases, building out media advisories, etc. There's straight public relations and media engagement, and that's distributing your releases. That is us getting you placed in publications and getting you interviewed by the media. We're your intermediary between your company and your organization and the media. It's advising you on best practices and engaging with the media. And in PR, there's a crisis communication component to it. And I'll share an example of that in a moment. Then there's strategic planning and communication, and that is in the helping you plan out your campaigns and events and looking ahead. And then there's stakeholder partnerships and community engagement, and that's tapping into our network and to the Evocati brand and helping your company make connections to other companies or organizations that you otherwise wouldn't have had without Evocati. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I
Yeah.
think that it's good to get a bigger picture of all of the different things that this might encompass. Because when you hear that, like that first line, your value prop statement or whatever, a lot of even I, the first time I heard it, I was like,
Yeah.
what does that really mean? Like,
Yeah. What does that look like? Yeah.
right, what is the practice of that? But I
Hmm.
think that the example that you gave there of there are a lot of organizations that need to be able to communicate with a population of people that's very, very large. There's a lot of military connected people, and you need somebody to do it.
Yeah.
PR is
Yes.
not going away.
It's not. And so we'll put some numbers to it. So if you were to hire every full-time employee that you would need to do what we do at Evocati, you're going to pay probably 60 grand a month in overhead. And you can get the same level of service at a higher quality from the experts at a fraction of that. So the value proposition is that instead of trying to do it in-house, you can work with a firm that will do it for you. That's the financial value proposition and the money that you're going to save as a business owner or even as a nonprofit as well.
I have two more questions for you today, Barrett.
Mhm.
Let's say that Evocati 10x's in the next 5 years.
Mhm.
What will you have done and you and your team have done to make that happen? What is it going to take for you to be successful?
Number one, constantly and consistently questioning our value proposition and whether we're meeting the needs of our customers. We have to be relentlessly focused on that. Number two, to not be afraid to experiment and pivot as a company in responding to those needs. And lastly, that we were able to increase our brand recognition and reputation as a company. I hope if we do 10x in that time that I'm no longer around, that I'm just, the old figurehead and I may come in and be, like annoying or something like that, but that we've hired somebody else who is far more talented than me and far more visionary than me to take it from 10x to even further at that time. But that person is a values-based leader and believes in the mission at Evocati.
My last question, you kind of alluded to this earlier, talking about the ability to have a spouse that was supporting you and, you kind of took the leap of faith to jump off the diving board or cliff or whatever, whatever some kind of tall object into the deep end of starting your own business. That may not be right for everybody. I would love to hear who it is right for and maybe who it isn't. Coming from a veteran lens, of
I've
course.
never talked a veteran out of starting a business. I've never talked them out of it. I've encouraged them to do it. And the primary barrier to entry was the lack of knowledge and lack of time. Knowledge you can fix. Okay, you can address that. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of courses that you can take. In fact, Bunker Labs has a really good course that you can take to help formulate your business idea. It's called Launch Lab Online. It's free to enroll, and I actually did that program as well. The time is the interesting thing. What I tell military veterans in our community is if you have a great idea, there is nothing lost in working on that idea as what Todd Connor, the founder of Bunker Labs, called as a third shift entrepreneur. And you can do that in your downtime if it's important enough to you. What I would say is it needs to be an idea that captures your imagination because it's something that you're going to pour yourself into. I wouldn't say that there are military veterans not cut out for entrepreneurship because, in fact, our community is overrepresented in terms of the number of veterans who own a small business compared to our peers. We do fairly well within the small business landscape. I would say this that you need to be prepared for the work ahead. And I'm not going to discourage you from doing it. And I am more than happy to encourage and mentor you through it. But it is going to be a very challenging thing. And it is going to require being honest with yourself and your limitations. And that's something that's hard for me to do. And it's going to require constant query and questioning and the pressure that you feel as an entrepreneur to being responsible for people and for their well-being, you've got to be prepared to handle that. For me, the best way to navigate that is to be a values-based leader. And you need to understand the values that you will adhere to and that you're not going to compromise in all that you do, but especially within your business. So my values are integrity, wisdom, family, teamwork, and empathy. Those are the five things that I don't compromise on, and those are actually the five corporate values of Evocati. So I built the company around my values, and those are the standards that we start with when we talk about working at Evocati in a company. So if you haven't identified what your values are as a leader, I would start there and then go into start thinking about the problem that you want to solve, the service that you want to provide, or the product that you have in your head that really excites you. It is absolutely possible to do that part-time and with the expectation that it can turn into a full-time opportunity. So I would encourage anybody who's listening, if you think you don't have what it takes or you have a lot of anxiety, I thought that as well. I still have anxiety over Evocati and concerned about are we going to make it? That is just part of the entrepreneurial journey. And you're going to realize after you take that dive, when you get down there, you're not alone. Like you're not by yourself. And I'm glad I did it. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk about it in detail with you, Brock.
I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us today, Barrett. This has been extremely instructive, both historically and in modern day context as well.
Yeah.
Where can people go to learn more about you,
Yeah,
follow along with you, plug any social you want,
yeah,
Evocati.
yeah, absolutely. If you're out there and you're listening and you have the same problem in your organization in terms of placement, marketing, reach, PR, social media, if you're that one person who's wearing all those different hats in your company and you need help, just visit evocatillc.com to learn more about what we do. And there's a button to contact us in the top right corner. For those of you who want to talk one-on-one and you're listening and you can identify with things that I said and you want to learn a little bit more, you can just find me on LinkedIn. Brock, if you want to put a link to my profile on LinkedIn on this, that's fine as well. Just reach out to me and send me a DM, and I'd be happy to connect with you all. That's it.
Barrett, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Brock. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.